Hello, everyone. Welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. My name is Noah Mintz. I'm the store's event director. Community Bookstore is celebrating over 50 years in business. We credit the continued support of readers and writers for this milestone. So thank you all for spending the evening with us. I'm very thrilled today to welcome Stephanie LaCava for a discussion of her new book, I Fear My Pain Interests You, in conversation with Lillian Fishman. Now to some housekeeping before I properly introduce our guests. We've enabled Zoom's auto-transcribe settings. If your version of Zoom is up to date, you can hit the live transcription button on the bottom of your screen to enable closed captions. If you have any questions for tonight's guests, please click on the Q&A button, which is also at the bottom of your screen. We will be asking those at the end of the program, so please don't be shy. There is also a chat box to which I'll be posting a link to buy tonight's book if you haven't already. And one caveat for tonight is that we're all at the mercy of our own home internet connections. So if there's any technical issues, bear with us, we'll resolve them quickly. Fall's an exciting time for books. We have a really stellar lineup of in-person and virtual events for you. So head over to our website, Community Bookstore, and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date. And if you're here in New York, you can find us this Sunday, October 2nd at the Brooklyn Book Festival. We'll be on the Brooklyn Borough Hall Plaza all day, selling books and hosting signings for all main stage and Borough Hall programs. So we hope you'll come and say hi. And now, a little about tonight's guests, and we'll get started. Stephanie LaCava is a writer based in New York City. Her work has appeared in Harper's, Art Forum, Texte der Kunst, the New York Times, and the New York Review of Books, Vogue, and Interview. Her debut novel, The Superrationals, was published by Semiotext in 2020. And Lillian Fishman was born in 1994 and lives in New York. She received her MFA from NYU, where she was a 2020 Jill Davis Fellow. Her first novel, Acts of Service, is out now from Hogarth. Now, without any further ado, I will hand it off to you. Stephanie, Lillian, thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you, Noah.
Hi, everybody. We're so excited to be here. I'm so excited to be here with Stephanie, whose wonderful new book we're going to be talking about, I Fear My Pain Interests You, which you can read about all over the internet right now and maybe already have. In case you don't already know, Talon in the New York Times called it poignant, substantial, heartfelt. So you don't need me to convince you. You can read all about it, but we'll tell you about it more. Okay. So what I was thinking, Stephanie, is that first we would talk a little bit about the book, the meat of the book, characters, the juicy stuff. And then I wanted to ask you a little bit also about your life as a writer.
You can ask me anything.
You know, all the writing life, the experience of writing as a writer. This interests me. Hopefully it interests other people as well. All right. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with sort of a potentially intense question, but that I've been thinking about since we first met a few months ago.
Okay.
When we met, you were like, you mentioned, you were telling me about your novel because I was asking you about it, and you casually said to me, without any opportunity for me to follow up, that writing the book had saved you. And, you know, there's so many things that could mean. And I sort of know by instinct what you mean as a writer, but I also wanted to know, like, how did you mean that? What was the experience of writing it like for you?
I mean, I think that, wow, man, I gotta be off the record when I'm meeting new writer friends from now on. I'm just teasing. There's a great quote, actually. I think it might have been Sean who wrote Fuckboy who said it, or no, maybe it was John, about like some of the best books have been written by people trying not to off themselves. And I don't say that flippantly. I say it as like an actual response to your question, just in the sense of sometimes, you know, we have a couple options. You can be hysterical on the floor, as we discussed earlier today. You can decide to go for a run. Some people decide to, you know, I don't know, bicycle. Some people decide to write. Like, we all have ways of coping with things. And this book was a serious exorcism at a certain point in my life that, you know, felt at the time, and hopefully, and in a way, I think that's why people are having the reactions they're having to it, because it just was like, you couldn't make up that kind of intensity in the way that it surfaced, which I'm sure you understand too.
Was part of the intensity of writing it, like, because it was so intense and that it was functioning for you as an exorcism in this way, did it happen very quickly? Like, how long did it take you?
Yeah, and that's something it's funny. They asked me about that last night too, and I made the joke that, which is actually true. I read that Remains of the Day was written in 2 weeks, and that kind of that has made me feel much better when people ask me that question. And I, I answer, well, the process of the note taking and the research was like, a decade, but the actual writing happened fairly fast, not 2 weeks, mind you, but like, yes, in an exorcism kind of way, a couple of months or so, or the actual core writing, even though the book had been in process for 2 years, or parts of it had been happening, or research had been happening.
Yeah. Did you, when you, like, what, if it had been in process and in research for a long time, were you always like, oh, now this is the moment in the future when I'm finally going to sit down and do this? Or was it like one day you were like, there's nothing else to do, I have to begin, and you entered the zone?
Well, more or less, Kian said to me, you need to give me the whole book, on this day, my editor. So that
you had a deadline.
That was the way it coalesced at the end. But, I'm actually quite fastidious when it comes to actually working. So the work was like clockwork every day for a long time. It's just that the actual synthesizing of it all into one document, or the writing of it, that actually happened more like rhythmically, like more dance, like more, fast all at once. But I would be taking the notebooks, distilling the notebooks, like all of that. It's not like I'm just like sitting around like staring at the wall. Do you know what I mean? But
yeah,
when you say writing, I think of the actual.
Yeah. No, that is what I mean. I know both processes are part of it. It's so funny. I think about that story about Remains of the Day very often.
I'm dying to have been in that room. 2 weeks.
It's amazing because I've read about this. It's amazing because it wasn't just that he like did this in 2 weeks in his regular life, but he had this idea that in order to inhabit this character's psyche, who is like such a specific isolated character, he needed to like clear his life and enter a fugue state. And so he had this agreement with his wife where like for 2 weeks she would provide everything that he needed, like without speaking to him, so like for a few hours in the evening he would like leave his office still not speaking to her, eat something that had been pre-prepared. Like he completely.
I have multiple comments on this. First comment is, but there's a lot to unpack, but my first comment is, do we call this method writing?
Yeah, I think this is in the large category of method, have a wife. That's the method. Like have.
I was thinking method, yes, like,
I know what you meant. And yes, it is. But I also think like that's what's required. Like it would be, I mean, I guess you could do this if you were totally isolated, and yet of course, like most people's lives would inhibit this type of like complete entrance into another world for 2 weeks. But I'm fascinated by that story as well.
I mean, it's like I think often of Vera Nabokov, and like,
exactly, yeah.
That's another story of similar way of like how the process
and Alice Toklas
done, by two people. It wasn't, it's always there's sometimes a lady behind the scenes or a man behind the scenes making it all happen.
enabling it in an essential way. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for telling me about the process. Let's talk a little bit about Margot, who's our narrator, and Graves. We have this character, Margot, who's the narrator of the book, who has a condition where she can't feel physical pain. And there's a lot of complex, interesting stuff going on in the book. But to me, the center of it is this relationship that she develops with this surgeon, who they call Graves in the book. She calls him Graves. Who's really fascinated and interested in this condition that she has. And they develop this sexual relationship that sort of explores those boundaries. And I guess the first thing I wanted to talk about is something that I immediately found fascinating about this relationship, which is that the source of Graves's interest in exploring this with her is the fact that she can't feel it when he harms her, right? Because I think the sort of fundamental reason that most of us sometimes want to hurt people or have an urge to harm someone, which is both appealing and disturbing to us, right, is for a reaction, right? Is to feel like someone can't ignore us, or that they're responding to us, that they can't help but respond to us, that we have some fundamental impact on them, right? And yet, like, the thing that he's so fascinated by and that he enjoys about his relationship with her is that she's immune to him, basically. Of course, she's not psychologically and emotionally immune, but like physically, she's immune to him in this way. And his orientation toward her is so mysterious and complex, right? There's like a warmth, there's a real warmth and an ambiguity to it. And I wanted to ask you how you thought about, like, we're in Margot's head, but how did you think about Graves's psychology and how he was like thinking about her, what attracted him?
I think the most important thing that first comes to mind with your question is this idea that of intentionality, like almost like, you know, if we zoom out for a minute, it's like two people enter into a dynamic in like a heteronormative way of dating, right? And there's the idea that maybe there's an end goal.
Yeah.
And that is the coupling, right? What if
Yeah.
the end goal is not the coupling? You know, and in a way that's kind of a twist on what it is with Graves, because the end goal is just simply the experiment. He's not in this to form a tender, you know, or to form a connection or an emotional bond. He's in it in more of a sociopathological way to, you know, sort of, or possibly, again, you know, it's up to the reader to quell his interest in her. And even him being an expert in the disorder she has is an example, you know, in abusive dynamics, obviously the person always finds out what is your trigger point, right? Or what is the thing, and somehow matches that instantly. And there's an instant feeling of connection that they often say is a huge red flag, so to speak, right? Because
it taps it, yeah.
So perfectly. So there are all those different kinds of ways of circling around it. It's not just what it seems, you know, in terms of the dynamic between the two of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that he's and he does, I was going to talk more about that as well, but he does, they both are like approaching it as a collaboration, and that's part of, I think, what is like so exciting about it. Yeah.
And what's also funny in terms of maybe that also happens in a transactional way in terms of the creative industry, because a lot of the book is about the culture industry and cultural capital as well, and you know, those relationships. And so there is the sense that, you know, and then maybe that relationship ends when that's consummated. But you know, the whole thing is about what does it mean to form a connection or a bond in a romantic way? And what does that mean with or without intentionality? Much in the same way the director, the earlier character, she's like, there was never a part. And by there never being a part could be taken literally, but it's also figurative in the sense he never wanted a partner. Whereas she was seeking these romantic excursions, thinking there would be an end game. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Their goals are different. I'm really interested in that. And I did want to ask you some more questions about like romance and love at a certain point. So we'll see. I can't wait to hear your thoughts develop on that. But I'm glad you brought up the director, because I was thinking about the director as well. There's, just to contextualize this, in the first half of the book, when Margot's first going to Montana where she meets Graves, she's sort of coming down from this relationship with this much older, very successful film director who she's had a like fundamentally unsatisfying romance with. I love the way you describe him, and the line that really stuck with me about it, where I could completely picture the person in the relationship, was that line, when he wanted to be elsewhere, a call soon came, which I thought was, wonderful. And I understood immediately. And something I was thinking about when I was thinking about this was like, that with Graves in a very different way, because we do see their whole relationship, and I think it is quite different from hers with the director. It's, the relationship is also sort of animated or defined by like his absences, like even though they see each other quite frequently, like there's a span of weeks or months where they see each other every other day, because Margot is alone and sort of stuck in this house where she doesn't have any other activities or obligations while she's there. There is a feeling that she's always waiting for him, and that all of the interstitial time is like meaningless, and that his presence or absence is almost like this,
which is a complete not to interrupt you, but in a way is like kind of illuminating or expanding that feeling, that young romance feeling that everyone has when it's like the moments in between. But there are literally moments in between where there's nothing else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's not that she's choosing to be like waiting by the phone. It's that, she sort of has this like empty life that she's like offered to him to fill in this way. Yeah, in a very profound way. did you like, how did you think about Graves and the director as alike or as foils? Like, did you think about this relationship with, I mean, I think there is an evolution in the way Margot responds to Graves versus the way she responds to the director, because he does have this awareness of her on a different level. But yeah, how did you think about those as like an evolution or a foil conversation?
Well, I think what's interesting about the two of them too is that they also serve to show perhaps Margot's pathologies, in that she keeps choosing these kind of men who reflect her needs, which is a common, a common theme, or like mentioned in the book, that, she's no matter, again, and there's another stream throughout the book about her not being a victim, about her making choices as well, like bad choices, but continuing to make the bad choices, to go back to the bad place, to have the codependency, to do whatever. And, the director sets that up as one example, and Graves provides a different example entirely, but it's not, it's not a wholly different dynamic. The director also, I liked the idea of them having these kind of like allegorical, like Pilgrim's Progress kind of, like defined by their like the director just being the director, also thinking about how we talk nowadays, even among like our friends, where, people are their Instagram handles, or they're like, they're the blanket name of, oh, their political stance. Oh, that's the, or, so I was also thinking about how we talk now and how we refer to people, and how gossip churns and people are referred, like it wasn't even really important what the director's name was, nor is it that important what Graves' name is, but what is important is that it's never offered, which reminds me, I was talking to someone about, have you ever seen Last Tango in Paris?
I haven't.
And so part of the affair that goes on between Maria Schneider's character and Marlon Brando's character is that they have this affair that's kind of like outside of their daily existence, outside of the world, in its own. And the thing he offers her at the end that's really poignant is he offers her his real name. Margot never gets Graves' real name. Margot gets nothing. And, and that's like, and she's okay with that. She never even asks his name, which is something to think about, right? Like, so she's just, she's putting in her phone this name because she meets him in a cemetery. The meet cute is in a cemetery, I guess, for people who haven't. And also Graves, in French means serious, or, or is used, in reference to body horror and things. So that was also kind of a fun play, but it was, if you look in my phone, I can guarantee you'd probably find a bunch of people listed as emojis or descriptives plus a name or something like that. And I was interested in that idea too, of how we, list people's contacts and how that's how they come up in our,
absolutely,
to our friends.
And there's also this way in which, like, right, she doesn't have Graves's real name, which is sort of like a denial of intimacy in a way, especially when you reference that film. But at the same time, there's also like, he isn't something that is being represented also to other people in her life that they have feelings about, that's like a communal experience, the way someone like the director, or like referring to someone through a universally known handle, is like, there's also a privacy to it, even though there's a denial to it.
And that's interesting, right, too, in the terms of it being like a love affair, because a love affair that takes place in privacy is not privy to the judgment often of the eyes of people, because it is a secret, right? And so there's that aspect to it, the aspect that they're in this house, and perhaps that's a stand-in for that, much in the same way, in Last Tango in Paris, it's like they're in this house and it's away from the world, it's another world, another place. And also the idea of, just also something as simple and silly as just like, you can be in a romantic dynamic with someone for a very long time and not ever know them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Graves are not Graves, and I don't mean in like a silly, like, con man way. I mean in a very real human way.
Yeah, of course. That knowing each other or knowing someone goes beyond like knowing, what the nature of their interest or relationship is with you. Yeah, absolutely.
Or even think about it, she only knows him in that context. Like, what about if the relationship was like plucked into a different context? Like all those questions,
that's something I really enjoyed about, later in their relationship. We never see them together in another context, and we don't get to know Graves outside of his relationship with her, but there is sort of a momentary intrusion of like rumors about what his life and his other relationships are like. And it does feel like such a disturbance of the private world, and as though like it's like this gargantuan mystery, or as though sort of like anything could implode when that intervenes. Yeah.
And also this idea that her not being able to anticipate his comings and goings, and his inconsistency being its own kind of monster sort of in the story.
Yeah. Well, that definitely brings me to something I'm really curious about like, the proportion and dance of control and collaboration that they have, right? Because they begin their sexual relationship as collaborators, where they both want to explore Margot's pain boundaries, pain responses or lack of pain responses.
Which essentially, in essence, could just simply be anybody starting a dynamic in which they're trying, if the intention is to have pleasure, or what, or
yeah, absolutely.
A similar inversion, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's intimate and erotic about it, is that they're like, we're going to embark on this together and see what we can discover. And then, without giving too much away, there is a point later in the novel where we realize with Margot that, in fact, during their ostensible collaboration, she hasn't always been privy to everything that's going on between them, because there are things that he can perceive that she can't, and that he hasn't clued her into. And I'm so curious whether you see her and Graves as collaborators throughout, like, there's so many ways to read that. And part of me thought like, okay, this is a departure where like actually something's being done against her, whether she's being used rather than collaborated against in this moment. And then another part of me feels that there's actually something fundamentally collaborative even about this experience of her not being privy to something, because the sort of basic premise that they're going to explore her boundaries together sort of includes like the boundary of what she can and can't perceive.
I mean, without getting into the, the very fine details of how this could go awry, just to say that desire is often about lack and what's missing, right? So the controlling of the lack of information is perhaps another way of perceiving a sustained interest between them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sense. And not that that's necessarily consensual, or not that we're looking into the ethics of it, but just that it's something to consider. Do you know what I mean? And like, the whole book is about lack, even that it's about lack of pain. So, this lack of information, lack of knowledge, lack of scheduling, lack of consistency, all of that adds to the eros of the dynamic of the collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. And totally, regardless of the ethics question, because we're in a world that's beyond that, right? Just the sensibility that you like have towards someone else.
Yeah, Montana situation.
Well, and of course, and also, right, I think the space of a novel is a space to ask, like, how does a person really feel, as opposed to how they should feel. Yeah, how did you think, you answered interestingly, but not completely enough for me. How did you think about Graves at that stage? Like, do you feel that there's a betrayal, or that it's an extension of their collaboration, or that it's both?
Well, that was the thing about that I was thinking. There's also this scene at the hospital, which has a similar, again, not to give a spoiler, but has a similar effect, when there's, this sort of collusion between the two doctors looking at each other like, should we do this? Should we not do this? Do you know the scene I'm talking about? Where they jam the caliper into her leg.
Yes, of course. Yes. When she's wounded. Yeah.
It's a similar kind of thing, right? Like, but for me, that again speaks to the intentionality. Like, what does it mean to hurt someone if they can't be hurt? And what does that even mean, right? Like, in the sense that, because I'm also very fascinated by different levels of sensitivity, different kinds of antennas, the different antennas that all of us have, and how they pick up on each other. and perception,
Yeah, absolutely.
personality, and all of that. Is that is that a more full answer? Or am I still?
No, it's a completely fair, it's not a full, but it is a fair answer. And I totally understand the novel, while a space to say how people feel rather than they should feel, is also a space that should retain its mystery. So I'll forgive you for that. But extending from that and talking more about control and returning to our question of love, which I suspect you'll also evade, but I'll still ask you about it. There's a part early in the novel where Margot's friend Lucy tells her that the opposite of vulnerable love is control, right? Which is something I think that rings throughout the novel. It reminded me of a line I really love from a Rachel Cusk book, where she says that to love someone is to be prepared to obey them, and that a love without this is either incomplete or tyrannical, and perhaps both. And I mean, this is a tough definition, of course, because and the whole way that Rachel Cusk is the reason that she brings this up and is responding to it is because we do have such a gut level reaction and protective reaction to the idea of obeying being a part of love. And people, there's a phenomenon now where people take that out of traditional wedding vows because the idea that you would obey each other is so disturbing to people. And yet there is something.
I didn't know that. That's a thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Well, I think women don't want to say like, I'll obey my husband, because there's something, and yet, as Rachel Cusk points out, this scene in which she writes this is about a wedding where she says, no, of course, the woman getting married says, of course, I want to promise to obey my partner, because that's what love means, that you'll obey someone, even the smallest child. And I think whatever moral or ethical things we feel about the relationship, right, there is, when we look at the Margot and Graves relationship in this way, right, there is such a like profound obedience in the way that Margot receives Graves, and it does ring deeply of love to me, whatever judgments we might have about it.
I think I think it's a very fair and important thing to say, that like, codependency or these kind of like unhealthy dynamics are not love to some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. And you can experience something as love, even if it's harming especially you, of course.
To go into psychoanalytics, obviously your childhood traumas match up to that, familiarity of, because that then it begs the question again, when people talk about, which is a question now that comes up because of the state of, the way the media works. So it becomes the question of, the question isn't always, is it a healthy relationship?
No, I think, is it a healthy relationship, or is it a healthy love, or is it a mutual love, are all totally different questions from, is what you're feeling love, which I think my reception is, of course, that what Margot was feeling was love. And I'm so interested, we were talking about this earlier, but I'm interested in expanding on it, on what Graves is feeling toward her, even beyond what he wants out of the sex, the reason he first approaches her. There is, even within his sort of apathy, what is at times his apathy, there is a progression in his relationship with her, and sort of an inevitable change in his feeling toward her. And something I remember from the book is that Margot's frustrated throughout the bulk of their relationship because he won't come inside her, and she seems to feel that that's like it symbolizes some sort of commitment or submission to her, or like an emotional capitulation to her. I'm thinking of it now that I'm thinking about this Rachel Cusk quote and the question of control and vulnerability and obedience as like that would constitute him being obedient to her in that moment, because that's something that she really craves and that he withholds from her. And there are some sort of key moments where he not collapses, but where he sort of does capitulate in a way to her. Do you think of the relationship between them as love? Do you think of the way he feels about her as including love? And do you think he like both loves her and wants to control her? Are they actually as distinct, as are love and control as distinct as Lucy claims that they are in the novel? Like, how do you think that he feels about her in response to that love that she offers?
Well, I think it's also down to the fact that like he has a fascination of something he wants to figure out, right?
Yeah.
Keeps drawing him to her. In this case, it's the disorder, right? It's to be able to and perhaps we feel on different, people who are neurodivergent also can experience these kind of things in different ways, but like perhaps for him the desire to know was the equivalent of what he was able to register as love.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
that's an amazing,
just a way of talking about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, in the sense that, maybe his desire to love her wasn't to become this like one, this double-headed creature together who, sort of just like giggled and you know what I mean? Just like
that there's something manipulative in it, but that for him, that desire and trajectory is very profound. The desire for knowledge of her.
Again, just been the idea of that you don't necessarily have to morally judge him. You can just experience what's going on and see it from all the different sides, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
And for him, think about it, when we're raised in, like, I guess in sort of Western mythologies, maybe, that there's like a one person for you, that you're supposed to settle on, you're supposed to find this mythical creature that completes you. And in this case, that's played with in the fact that Graves' medical specialty was the disease that Margot happens to have, and they meet in the middle of a graveyard in the middle of nowhere, right? So it's like playing on that Western myth of like the one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it is really important and key. And it's felt in the book that they're both, their whole orientation toward other people is so different that it is hard to compare like what they would each experience as love.
And I had a bunch of friends who would come up to me and were like, like, Graves is really hot. Like, I'm into Graves. You know what I mean? I'm into Graves. Like, almost as if like you weren't supposed to say that, because it was so clear, perhaps in this way that we've come to look at relationships of like, healthy dynamics, or that like to say that was, you had to be say it quietly and whispered in my ear.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? That in and of itself, again, without judgment, is just interesting.
It is absolutely. And I think I've had the same reaction. My novel has a male character in it who's like, like some people think he's toxic, some people don't think he's toxic, but everyone's like so ashamed of the idea that they would be attracted to this toxic thing, but they are, of course.
And we all are, and it takes a lot of work to sometimes realize or suspend it, or, all the things.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to give away anything about the ending, but what I will say about it is that it ends with not one, but two very striking bangs for me. And it's so strong. And I really wanted to ask you, if you knew from the beginning how it would end, or when you discovered the ending.
That's a great question. And I didn't know from the beginning. And I think it would have been a very different book if I had, in a way. In a way, what was going on between them led me there. And I was at one point more interested in the surveillance element, which kind of falls to the back. The final version, but that had been at one point something culturally and symbolically that had been more important to me. But
I can easily imagine that being a big revelation.
And Josephine watching, and and this idea of like us recording, it was during the time all these, the body cams, or even before that, sex tapes, like all these recording of intimacies, of moments of, great desire and death, and like, and the recording of it on a device. And that kind of fell away. I think that falls away in the version that is given now, but it's just something interesting to think about too.
Yeah. Do you remember what stage of writing you were in when you discovered the ending, or did you stumble upon it in the writing? How did you find that?
I don't remember exactly now. And what's funny is different people still have different readings of what happens, which I wish we could talk about, but we can't talk about.
I agree. I've been asking people about their readings because I do think we all have different ones, but I won't bring them up.
I honestly had no idea that kind of ambiguity would happen, which I love, and is super interesting as well. But I mean, the funny part is that you've just made me realize, I think these conversations are always super successful when they also allow the author to realize something that
I
maybe,
hope so.
no, that maybe that scene, that early scene with the Muzak in the doctor's office in the hospital and the caliper was a setup for, was kind of like a mini version of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. Do you know what I mean? In terms of, again, exploring the intent, the idea of intentionality and hurt if you can't feel pain. And granted, it's different, the relationship between a doctor and a patient, but you have such things in places like Hippocratic Oath, which is mentioned. But what's the oath when it's your lover? Do you know what I mean? And like all these
Yeah.
that then take on a different, a different
Yeah.
level or a different intensity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's quite elegant and beautiful that whether or not you intended it or it was subconscious or whatever, there is that the mirroring of those different scenarios that both have that tonal energy. And there's a lot of lovely mirroring or inversions in the book.
A lot of doubling, a lot of
Yeah, absolutely.
repetitions. And again, to me, that was quite intuitive. It wasn't like on purpose so much as I think also a way of seeing that as humans, we do have pathologies,
Yeah.
like, again, those two instances, she finds these two men, we repeat the same mistakes, we repeat the same patterns. It's so human.
Yeah.
Like, it's
It's
almost
so
like I people
inevitable.
always say in fiction, if you wrote something like that, no one would believe it because it would happen again and again. But actually, that's the reality.
Yes, of course. Absolutely. Yeah. We don't have the clean character progressions that we
Yeah, we're
expect
not,
from fiction.
we're not like, oh, remember that's now I'm going to do this the right way. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. What was the like, I mean, I guess you could answer either of those. When you were working on the book, did you have like a real dream or a real fear about how people would receive it? Either one or both?
that's a great question. I think I didn't really, because for me it was just so real in the moment of it coming out and the way it, like, it wasn't like very what's the word,
Self-conscious, maybe.
yeah, and it wasn't, and it was in a way too, it was I mean, I think I joke around a lot with people now. I'm like, oh great, you're gonna read the book and you're not gonna let your kids come to my house. Like, or like, like I make a lot of jokes about the darkness of the book because like the book is very, very dark. And I
Yeah,
don't
absolutely.
and like throughout the book, I mean, even that scene where they talk about the defibrillator, the girl trying to restart her heart. I mean, there's page after page of dark, kind of morbid, whether it's humorous or not, and I don't think
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think I ever felt so free to, I mean, be that much. I mean, the reality is that's very much a part of me, but I always felt I had to cover that up, and maybe
Yeah.
less so now. And you can feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's certainly what makes a book powerful, is the sense that someone is like overcoming their like shame hide response in order to offer something really crucial to them. Yeah, absolutely.
Like I have no, what's the word? What's the expression? Sometimes I can't think of I know what I'm trying to say, but I can't think of is it druthers? I don't, what is that expression like about, like, I wasn't like afraid, like I just wasn't.
That's
Like,
amazing.
and that's also, I guess, maybe though, not to my credit, it's because I did create this aloof voice that's very different from my own voice that speaks throughout the book and allowed a form of judgment.
Like you felt that you controlled it in a way.
Exactly, the control. Yeah, I controlled by showing the lack of control throughout the story. We can really fuck people up. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna ask you a last, like, sort of two-parter question, and it's about your life as an artist. There's an idea I'm really interested in last year, this sort of retrospective idea, which we're both too young to really.
Wait, hold on. But I noted that 1994. Woo! At the beginning.
No, but that was just my book bio.
You're a lot younger than me. Anyway, keep going.
No, but it is true that one of the things I'm most interested in is obviously, and I know you're really interested in art and plenty of artists from the last century as well. So I know that you'll have feelings about this as well. Like it's most fascinating to look at artists not in one text, but in the whole of their career and how they developed and thought about their work at different stages. Some artists have huge breaks and revolutions in their themes and ideas, and with others it's more consistent. I was reading a while ago this amazing book about Robert Irwin, the artist Robert Irwin, and he talks about how he reveres Mondrian because Mondrian was an artist where even though there was this tremendous growth and change throughout his career, like at the same time, Irwin feels that there's this essential expression of his viewpoint that you can see evidently progressing and building between each work, that each one clearly builds on the last one. And that there's this real sort of linear progression and you can see the ideas emerge until they're fully formed. And I'm so curious whether at this stage, like you have an idea about what your sensibility or your essential viewpoint is as an artist, and like how you see the continuity between your first book, or your first novel, The Superrationals, and I Fear My Pain Interests You. I mean, this is an impossible question, right? Like I assume
No, it's not. It's funny. I had a similar question come up, and I have had thoughts about them as the first two in a trilogy, and that keeps recurring to me in kind of like a dream-ish way. I'm not sure how that will resolve itself, but I think this young woman character is going to have to happen in a 3 and then go on
Mathilde and Margot and a third one.
Yeah. The next who comes after Mathilde and Margot, and where does she go?
And what do you see as sort of like already between Mathilde and Margot, the sort of like crucial similarities and differences?
I mean, I think there are so many, and that was kind of on purpose. I like that the names are doubles as well. I mean, they're both a similar kind of, in a similar kind of living in similar worlds. Both finding their way, and one of them is much more aloof than the other, both sort of like struggling with female relationships, and yet the female friendships are the strongest ties they have.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about that as well.
Yeah, which I think is really an interesting revelation for me, because that was certainly not something I set out to do, nor necessarily how I view the world. So that's kind of fascinating, right? When that happens, and like,
interesting,
you create these, everyone's like, oh, you write such great female friendships, or, these, I mean, they're complicated too, for sure, but I do write them, and I didn't even, that wasn't something I necessarily am thinking about as I'm going along.
Interesting.
And I also think that I think they're I don't know, I just keep having, a lot of my work is intuition based, and I do feel like, I also feel like this book and that book were kind of a larger, as you've seen, like maybe I look at them in terms of publishing, not only in writing, because there's like a larger conceptual thing to both of them, right? The images that are associated with them, the way I present them, the way I talk about them, the way they enter the world, the other artists that are, like all of it has been part of the publication process of the work, which I think will continue with another book, and then maybe it'll become something different. It's not only the writing in these 2 books that have made the books.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very interesting. I think it's not, obviously, who knows if it's unique, but it's unusual for you as a writer to think of the trajectory as also being about the cultural reception and the books as objects. And
I mean, it's probably really unhealthy and detrimental to my, and it changes the stakes completely, and it feels overwhelming, but I'm very controlling, to speak of control, of all of those aspects of all the things.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I think, at once, you can't, no matter how controlling you are, you can't control all of it. And at the same time, you have to be invested in that, because the book is in conversation with its culture, and that's part of what makes it resonant. So it absolutely makes sense.
but maybe for me, it's just like on a different level because of my background in journalism or media, you know, all these different kind of things. Just for me, that conversation is omnipresent. Just like in the way some people have said to me, oh, that's so funny. Like all the other writers were like, yeah, now I'm done. Here's the book, I'm done.
Yeah, that's how I am.
But for me, it's like it's like, no, I'm halfway done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, yeah, your relationship to it has multiple facets, which I think I can really feeling you present the book. It's wonderful.
I mean, I don't know, it could be really bad too. I'm not sure if it's good, but I think it's just a product, again, of also what I often write about, which is a young woman in the culture industry and the presentation of that and how that affects, you know, it just doubles over onto itself or vomits onto itself or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's impossible to escape. You have to have sort of like some determined relationship to it. And it can be like, I'm done, or it can be like, I want to shepherd this, you know, deliver it on multiple levels, not just on the textual level. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're gonna take some questions from the folks that we can't see, but who we've been sharing the space with. I'm gonna open up this Q&A. Oh, the first is from Eva. Let's see. For Stephanie, say something about how you see or would like to see your book travel to international audiences in terms of wider sensitivities about power and control, but also cultural references.
I love that. I mean, that for me is huge, considering, I mean, we never even got into this, but you know, I grew up as a third culture kid. And you can also feel that. I sometimes think in the writing, you know, like I speak some Hebrew and I speak French more fluently. And I think you can feel the punctuation taking on a different, you know, I know she's not talking necessarily about the exact, you know, words on the page.
No, but that makes sense. Yeah.
I think it'll be interesting in translation. I'm also obsessed with translation to see where that goes as well. But in terms of, you know, there's nothing I enjoy more, which is a funny word to say, but I'm so interested in the norms and mores and cultural shifts between territories and places.
Yeah.
And that's why my practice also as a publisher, you know, I publish tiny works in translation that other people translate, because for me, it's so important that we grow up hearing stories from all over. I mean, what a detriment it is that in the American publishing, you know, marketplace does the smallest amount of works in translation, which means we're getting the smallest amounts of these other norms, mores, viewpoints, stories.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, absolutely.
Not in a pretentious way, in a way of simply not being narrow-minded, of like the fact that there, you know, there is not one psychic space. This book is one girl's psychic space. You know, it's a very, very small thing in the measure of, and that's why it's so important to read so many different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's amazing that the book is going to be published abroad, hopefully in many different territories. And
I'm very excited about that. Also, because I'm interested in, you know, there is so much French writing, literary influence in the book. And there's so much of the characters for me that comes from different things I picked up along the way from different places.
Yeah. And is the book slated to come out in France as well?
Not yet. But
okay. I definitely hope so. I
haven't heard yet, but you know, I hope so. I mean, it very much is informed by, I mean, I've had many interviews where all they want to talk about is like how it's like, you know, the Francois Sagan kind of character, you know, there's
there's a real resonance and legacy. Yeah, absolutely. We have another question. I'm going to try this answer live button so that the question comes out up on the screen. I didn't do that on the last one. Let's try it. This notion of surveillance is very intriguing. I wonder if Margot, in her inability to feel pain, becomes a more valuable subject for biosurveillance, a study of pain. Do we desire to sense surveil beyond our abilities?
I love that question. And I think, you know, and I immediately see the original clipping that I had from the Salk Institute. I think the girl in the clipping had on those, what do you call those stickers when they're doing like checking your heart rate? You know,
oh yeah, I know what they look like, but I don't know what they're called.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, of course.
In horror movies, they use them too, like putting them on your head.
Yeah.
On your
to
heart.
Show that you're like enclosed by sensors. Yeah.
Do you know what those are called? See if he's not answering us. But I do think I do think there's a big element of that. Almost like, also imagine if I'm almost seeing Josephine watching the video and it coming in that way that you see like a hurricane come in all the different colors. You know what I mean? When a hurricane or meteorological
yeah, that there's like an eye
that her pain, like you can see the neurons like moving. I know that wasn't
absolutely.
that question, but it's giving me these kind of images.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting, that sensibility about it. Thank you, Jack. We have a question from Stephen. Stephanie, can you speak more on the morbidity and darkness that you mentioned you feel this work exhibits for you more than your previous, and how you might think it relates to feeling more free as a writer, as you said?
100%. I think there was a huge amount of repression and maybe even posturing in my first book that I can admit to and say, thinking I was supposed to be writing this thing that sounded this way in this way, or being this thing. And, gradually, and I still am, it's not, fully realized, letting go of that to allow a more, my more real interests or my more tendencies or, the real things that I grapple with to really be okay to discuss in my work. There was a point when my first book came out where it was like, it was still a bit taboo to even talk about having depression, like in the circle of, and this is like a complete 360.
We're living in a very different world, a very different world.
You know what I mean?
It's taboo not to talk about depression.
And also, even this book, it's like now we're stabbing people with, Caliban.
Absolutely.
But now we're talking about, scabs and, but it's just to say that like, that's less of, I can't really attribute it to anything other than, having become more comfortable with myself and having worked harder on my craft, I guess, to allow that to come through.
Yeah.
Just to work through, or to like, I see like a visual of like someone at an archaeological site, like sort of like tapping the thing and finally breaking through. Do you know what
Yeah. Do you think that that was part of the work of your first book, like that you had to like go through that first process of getting out all of these other ideas and, like whatever assumed or pretensions or whatever that you had about how you had to write a book?
And things I've written that haven't been published, for sure. There's so many things. And I don't necessarily think the first thing you write should be published. And I'm probably evidence of that as well.
No, I feel the same way. Yeah.
But, and it's like, I really do feel like this is the first book I've done where I've found more of what my voice is, even more so than the novel before it, and I'm continuing to evolve. And I've been lucky people have allowed me to publish maybe things that aren't fully realized even yet, I'm still figuring it out.
That must feel amazing. Like,
what do you mean? You figured it out majorly.
No,
you have an MFA, you have the whole thing going on. I'm like coming from left field, I don't know what's going on.
No, Stephanie, you have such a vast erudition about art that I envy. And that you can feel underlying your books in such a profound way.
Thank you.
No, and I think it's essential. I think there's a real depth to it that you should not be dismissing, should not be self-deprecating about.
The girl can't write a plot, but I'm just kidding.
Listen, none of us can. It's a whole fucking mess. And in fact, I have to say that you have, I already mentioned, and we'll still keep it secret in what exact way, but I think that you really ended the book, not on a whimper, but a bang, which is the ultimate plot challenge. The ultimate challenge, I think. A lot of
people don't like that, or at first are very uncomfortable with that, because it also shows a lack of pacing. Or like all these,
I think that's subjective. I don't think it shows a lack of pacing.
But I think people want more of like,
people don't want something to develop suddenly in the last line. But you know what? I do. I want something to develop suddenly in the last line. That's how you get the frisson in the body,
how things happen. Like, we look back on the moments, not to be cliche again, but like when like shit really hits the fan or changes, and it happens in the last line.
It's true. And in fact, I feel like some of the better advice on writing that I got in my MFA is that we were constantly being told that you should just cut like the last third of whatever you do. Like you'll always go on. You'll always, and we read a lot of amazing stories as examples where the stories were published, the stories were wonderful. And my teacher would say, okay, do you see that the last half page is just like some bullshit?
That's so
the last half page is just like, and here I'm going to summarize what happened and how I felt about it at the end. And it's like, we actually don't need that. Like the accumulation is sufficient. Like we feel the accumulation,
This book basically just punches you in the stomach and then you're left to figure out like what happened.
Yeah. I think that's a very exciting reading experience. You're teasing it all for everyone very effectively. We have one more anonymous question. I'd love to hear more about the research and note-taking phase of your writing process. In particular, when did the concept of a protagonist who can't feel pain come up? Did you start there and build the book around it, or was it something that came later?
It did. It was initially a clipping that I found and I printed out. I still can see the printout, which is also what I thought of when I thought of those stickers, which we're going to find out what they're called after.
Yes, we're going to Google it. We're going to let everyone know.
Yeah, of a young woman who was part of a study at the Salk Institute on this disorder.
Okay.
And I saved it and I immediately felt drawn to it. I think because of my own struggles with depression and sensitivity, again, it was the inversion of that. And that was very fascinating to me, and to try and figure out what that meant. Also in terms of, I'm also sort of always interested in this idea that you can test, when a woman is pregnant in utero for everything except for mental illness, right? Like, and what is that? And that kind of plays out in this narrative in its own way, that this is like hereditary disease of feeling, of unfeeling. We can't test for emotional deficient. Like, I'm just very interested in
and yet it is also physical. It's not just mental. Yeah.
Like what, you can test for everything except for, in generations that continue to commit suicide based on, you know what I mean? Like, the world the science is mad. It's fascinating. It's interesting. But to me, I don't see it just as the thing. It always takes these kind of strange, absurdist twists and turns.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of these like structures and orientations that we take as given are of course like historical and often not meaningless in their form.
And also something people kept saying, which I think is really true and important, is that this is not like a researched book in the way that like someone I admire who does it, like Tom McCarthy does, where he heavily researches, like wind tunnels or whatever he's writing about. For me, it's an absurdist, surrealist vehicle. But I can't explain to you the neurodynamics, beyond what in layman's, you know what I mean? Like I don't know exactly what happens if she stubs her toe, like that was not.
No, and the book doesn't need it.
Yeah.
And did you, after you found that clipping, did you sort of like look out for this topic and encounter it in other places throughout your?
There was another article that came out more recently in the Times about it that I just so happened to see, but I knew I wanted to write about it. I was just like fascinated, by this idea. And I mean, what also is fascinating and part of the story that we didn't talk about either is that, the truest way I found to show the narcissism of the parents was that their daughter had a disorder that they didn't know about. They never knew about.
Of course, even though it's like so dangerous.
Yeah.
It's like, such a dangerous disorder to not be able to feel pain, like any child
not
would.
Knowing your child, which is another way of looking at it in like a twist. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It craves to tell her what was wrong with her.
Yeah.
She's lived 20 years like this.
And that is sort of like one of the ultimate intimacies. I mean, however disconnected their relationship is, it's also, that's the ultimate intimacy, is to actually be known in a way you didn't even realize.
Someone who can tell you what you are, that kind of validation is the ultimate intimacy.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is a very beautiful note to end on. I love that. One of my themes as well, a theme I adore.
Yeah.
Thanks, Noah.
Yeah, thank you both, Stephanie and Lillian. This has been fantastic, fascinating. I feel like we could go on like this forever, but should probably let everyone get to bed. Those of you at home, thank you for your very thoughtful questions. Hope you'll consider purchasing a copy of I Fear My Pain Interests You from Community Bookstore.
And Acts of Service.
And Acts of Service, of course. Yeah, links to both books are in the chat, so you can find them there on our website. And we hope to see you at another virtual event really soon. Yeah,
thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Good night.
Okay.